The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, I think we should be good. Hello, everybody. Guys, I believe you can hear me perfectly fine, right? Martin, Ilcha?
Yeah.
Great,
Yeah, absolutely.
great.
Hear you perfectly well.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all today on our Procurement and Contracts webinar organized by LEORON Professional Development Institute. My name is Mario. I will be your host for today. I will be the LEORON representative on today's session. Throughout these past few weeks, me and my team in LEORON, we've really tried to reach to as many of our clients, as many of our procurement and contracts, friends and connections regarding this amazing opportunity. I already see 200 attendees on the list. We expect the number to increase even more within the next few minutes. So I'm very happy about that fact. I think you will all take the most out of this opportunity. Before we get into the actual session and before I leave the floor to Mr. Martin Chalkley, our speaker for today, let me first welcome the head of the Procurement and Contracts Unit in LEORON, Mr. Ilcha Ndekovski. Hello, Ilcha.
Hello. Hi, Mario. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being with us today. So, me and Ilche, we will be sort of the line, we will be the connection, the bridge between all of you guys and our speaker. You probably all see the questions box on your screen somewhere at the moment. And this is where you can all ask questions. So this is where throughout the session, regarding the topics that will be discussed, I strongly encourage you to ask the questions and we will try to proceed and forward them to the trainer so he can pay attention and answer as many of them as possible live. Of course, bearing in mind that we do have a limited time, we're going to have about an hour and a half today, so we will really try to get the most out of this opportunity and answer as many of them as possible. All right. So without further ado, let me introduce you all to the star of today's session, Mr. Martin Chalkley. Martin, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mario.
Great.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of managing contractual relationships. Very much interesting topic at the moment, obviously, given the fact that here I am sitting in my office, in my home, and my colleagues from LEORON sitting in their respective offices in their respective homes for obviously very good reasons. There's a thing out there called coronavirus and we're all sheltering from it to the extent to make sure that we obviously don't catch it, and we're all adhering to our respective country regulations. I know that many of the people listening on this particular call today are coming from the likes of Azerbaijan, from Saudi Arabia, from Kuwait, from UAE, and you're all subject to your own sort of curfews and so forth. So what I want to try to do today is get across to you some of the principles, some of the ideas that we go through in the training courses that I teach for LEORON, and to the extent that I can, I'm going to try and relate these back to actually what's happening in our global society at the moment with regards to this whole principle of coronavirus to COVID-19. So if I just move forwards, the approximate agenda for what I want to try to cover today is in part just looking sort of a bit of the history of where were contracts procurement and how is the world moving forward? How are they being seen? How are they being aligned into the world at the moment? How are they being operating within various different organizations? So obviously I get the wonderful privilege of being able to go around the world. Most recently I was in Nigeria teaching some people from Chevron there. But I've also been obviously many times in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, over to Baku, Azerbaijan. I've taught in the Australian military, back here in the UK. So there's a whole wealth of information that I've managed to pick up over the years on how is this world of contracts and procurement moving forwards? I'm going to then sort of go on to cover what's actually quite important for you guys at the moment, which is how to read a contract. And I'll give you some sort of highlights and pointers as to what you can do to try to essentially drive the most value out of the relationships that you have. And we'll briefly cover some of the clauses that may be of a specific focus to you at the moment during this COVID-19 outbreak. And beyond that, obviously, we then need to actually administer our contracts, so the post-contract award. And this is vitally important because actually having the contract is great, but the real benefit comes from actually then being able to maximize the mutual benefit and minimize the loss that exists in those relationships that we have. So relationships, we can have negative relationships, we can have positive relationships, and a lot of what I want to try to cover today is also really about how to create the right behaviors to minimize disputes, minimize claims, maximize opportunity, because at the end of the day, a contract is a behavioral document. It defines how you're going to behave, and it very much defines how I'm going to behave, and the way in which we look and the way in which we read the contracts actually starts to drive our respective behaviors, and it starts to drive whether or not we're actually going to have success, and it starts to drive whether or not we're actually going to sort of have the disputes, the claims, and so forth. So we'll look at some of those aspects within the terms and conditions, and ultimately then is starting to think, okay, I've got numerous business relationships within my organization, so where should I be focusing? How should I be looking at my business relationships? Because I don't have time to manage everybody. I've got limited resources in many organizations' case, limited focus in many organizations' case to be able to do everything. So it's how do I pick and choose the right ones to be able to actually try to focus on during this pandemic. So as I said, my name is Martin Chalkley. I'm an accredited trainer for the International Association of Contracts and Commercial Management. It's a worldwide global body that ultimately is there looking to see what economic value can be driven out of our contractual, our commercial relationships. I'm an expert in SRM. I teach their SRMP training course. There's one coming up in May. I teach their CCM, the Contracts and Commercial Management training course. There's one coming up in June. And ultimately, what I'm here to do is put across to you the principles, some of the stuff that you're likely to see if you attend in some of those training courses with myself. I've just completed a course this last week with a number of people online, who essentially, because we're in this world at the moment where I can't come to the Middle East or to Azerbaijan or to wherever and actually sit in a meeting room with you guys, it's also now about how do we actually start to think and be innovative in the way in which we ultimately are driving to, provide the information, provide the training that LEORON, the IACCM is wanting to put in your respective directions. So if I start with thinking about how do we move away from this transactional approach, how do we become a value creator? And the reality is, historically, procurement function very much seen as an administrative function, very bureaucratic. Essentially, whenever I'm in the classroom and I'm asking the question, what I hear is that procurement's contracts is often seen as a blocker to the progress of the business. People involve them late, they engage the stakeholders late, they engage the contracts, the legal people too late in the process, and it's always or frequently a case of we need this done by Thursday or we need this done by Friday. And in the past, they've seen as sort of the organisation that raises the requisitions, the POs, and ultimately runs the tenders. Now, what IACCM has been seeing over the past few years is that we're very much a sort of a confident delivery team. We have a lot of industry, we have a lot of supplier expertise, we have a lot of knowledge. We have the ability to question what is actually happening within our respective organisations. We're able to understand and take a strategic perspective to be able to look from a more strategic direction and really try to deliver the economic benefit that we actually went into a lot of these relationships for in the first place. Because if what we do is we just rely on how we were on the traditional sourcing strategy, if it's just about sort of the category management and being better in negotiation, then yes, we will create value. But actually, we then soon start to run out of processes, methods, opportunities to be able to actually create further value. Our opportunities begin to diminish. And what we've seen is supplier relationship management, and my background is very much in this focus, in this state, in government body here in the UK, is that the supplier relationship management is ultimately that next evolutionary step in the process. So what we're thinking about, and I'm going to elaborate a bit more on what SRM is why are we wanting to do this? Why are we wanting to try to have better relationships with our suppliers? What do we think ultimately we can achieve? So a really good starting question is to think, what is the benefit of suppliers? Why do we actually use suppliers? And it seems like a very sort of simplistic question. Actually, as we start to think about it, we realize that we're using them for a multitude of purposes. They have expertise. We don't need to necessarily recruit and hire people on a permanent contract basis because we can leverage the expertise that exists out in the environment. Our suppliers have relationships that we can actually latch onto, that we can ultimately utilize. And IACCM has a relationship with LEORON, and we use that capability, and LEORON uses that capability in order to reach a far greater audience. Suppliers have capacity. They have the capability. So ultimately, we may sort of run out of the physical resources, be that human capital, be it the financial aspect, and actually we can therefore, to an extent, rely on the capacity of our suppliers to support us. Our suppliers have innovation. In an organization, there's only so many human minds. But as soon as we start to take on board the number of people that exist within our suppliers, suddenly the number of human minds that are there and able to actually help resolve and fix and come up with ideas to problems that we may have is increasing. And that's something that ultimately motivates suppliers. Ultimately, I'm a supplier working with LEORON, and I'm motivated by the fact that they're wanting to run these courses, that they're wanting to run this series of webinars, because to me, it's a great opportunity to be able to engage with what I'm currently looking at, 285 odd people online, and hopefully being able to put across some of the benefit of the knowledge and the experience and the joy that I have in actually coming and talking to you guys. And ultimately, suppliers are there to help create competitive advantage, to help you as customers be more economically efficient. We're potentially even prepared to invest in you. It could be financially, or it could be in process, it could be in opportunity. So that's us. But what are suppliers looking for from a customer? Ultimately, we were looking for stability. Naturally, we want to ensure that we're able to pay our staff. And no more is that relevant than right now in this world of coronavirus. Everybody, if not everybody, is suffering some kind of concern, some kind of issues because of what this virus is doing globally. And the first and foremost requirement of any organization right now is to ensure stability, is to ensure that we're there whenever the lockdowns that exist in our various countries lift, but not just then, but actually for the next sort of period of 6 to 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, however long it takes to come out the other side of this particular scenario. Naturally, we want to be profitable, but we also want to explore, and it's wonderful being able to work with ILCHA right now, because it's about being able to explore what can we do through this webinar series. I know that you're planning on doing some more webinars on other aspects of procurement in the near future. It's the first time that we've tried this. We're now up to 291 people online. It's a great opportunity for us to see just how much excitement this is actually driving across LEORON's market, essentially. We're looking for references, naturally, and I've been doing courses for however long, and it's great when I stay in contact with people over the next sort of however many years, and I still speak to people 5, 6, 7 years after I've delivered courses, and they're looking to still ask me questions from 7 years ago. That's a wonderful feeling for me. I'm looking for customers who want to be innovative. That is this system. It's about, developing new products. Again, that is this system. And ultimately, I want a relationship that actually works, that is easy. Nobody likes trying circumstances. Nobody wants to go into a relationship that's going to be difficult and painful. Everybody wants their relationships to be effective. We want responsive.
Martin,
hello.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but since you started talking about supplier relationships, we have a good question here from Mr. Wazim. He says, how do you come out of the traditional approach of L1 vendor to supplier relationship management and to be able to take the management on board?
Can you repeat the question?
How do you come out of the traditional approach of L1 vendor to supplier relationship management?
So essentially, that's some of the stuff that I'm going to be discussing through the course of the rest of this presentation. And it's starting to try to actually have a visual representation of what is it that I'm actually looking for from this particular scenario. What do I envisage I'm actually going to require as I look to the long term? I need to start thinking about segmenting my suppliers and actually understanding what is it that they can bring to me. So let me go through a couple more slides and we'll start to pick up a bit more on that. Because actually, playing to that is we need to understand what our customers are expecting from our suppliers. So to the extent that actually, as an L1 supplier, what are my customers looking for from my onward supply chain? What else do I need to provide? What else do I need to do? Because do I just want a transactional approach with my customer? Or do I actually want to start to have an ongoing relationship, a conversation that ultimately shows that I, as a supplier, am choosing a supply chain who's going to be responsible, who understand their role in how I can help you. Because what you don't want, Wasim, is surprises. What you don't want is my ability to deliver being inhibited by my supply chain. So part of what we need to start to think about is how do you and I actually create a better opportunity for the pair of us to be able to work together to understand what I can bring to you. So you need to start to think about how do I deliver value. The first one is, you're potentially looking to reduce costs. And certainly I've been speaking to friends in the Middle East, and there's a very, very, very big focus immediately that the coronavirus hit on reducing their own costs and ultimately reducing risk, because there's a big risk at the moment. But if I think about the longer term with, Saudi Vision 2030 or any other of those sort of international visions, what we're looking for is how do my suppliers help me with my economic growth, and how can they help me start to transform? So that's what's happening on the left, and in the middle is some of those core principles. I'm looking for more streamlined operations. I'm looking for efficiency. I'm looking for better governance. I want to have better talent management. I'm looking to improve my local economy. So all of these factors ultimately is what I'm looking for my suppliers to actually deliver to me. But I recognize that with my sort of strategic level suppliers, that actually takes effort. It isn't just naturally going to happen. It's something that needs to be worked out between yourself and myself to be able to understand how can we work together? How can we work together to improve services? How can we be more integrated in our approaches? How can I work with you in the way that I'm now working with Ilcha, with Mario in a more integrated fashion to deliver this session for you guys? That is that last section. We're being technology driven. It's not a necessity to actually stand in a classroom. These last 5 days have proved that this technology process is actually possible. You know, it doesn't replace the classroom capability, but certainly it's about how do we try to transform. So very much if you're thinking about how do you want to engage to your suppliers, then you're thinking not just about the reducing of cost and the reducing of risk, but how can they support your economic growth? How can they drive an agenda for transformation to be able to move forward? So SRM, supplier relationship management, is about collaboration increasing collaboration. We wanted to deliver additional value. It's not, I want to demand more from my suppliers. It's, I want to deliver additional value that is actually going to benefit both myself as a customer and also my suppliers. How can we work together? You know, it's the win-win scenario. So SRM, it's very much a more holistic approach to supplier management across the entirety of the life cycle. It's not just about the vendor qualification. It's not just about the tendering approach, the evaluation approach, or the negotiations. It doesn't stop the moment that we've signed the contract. It is looking longer term throughout the delivery of the contract, all the way through to when we believe that contract is ultimately going to come to an end. And even then, the relationship doesn't end, because who knows what is beyond. So SRM is about much better engagement with our suppliers, delivering more value, more sustainably. And it's not around those traditional procurement approaches of, you know, shouting and beating your fist on the table and, you know, liquidated damages is the answer. It's about actually having an educated adult conversation to be able to say, where are you going? Where am I going? How can we get there together? How can we go beyond just the value? And I don't mean the price value, but I mean the opportunity value that's in the contract. How can I look to deliver further? So what does a contract do? A simple question again. And if I ask this in classrooms, it quite often comes down to, it's a document, it's a formal agreement between two parties. It defines a scope and it defines, you know, the relationship through the terms and conditions of how we're going to work together, and it minimizes the risks to me as a customer. Well, yes, it does do that, and that's certainly legal's perspective on what is the contract there to achieve. But actually, and this was a question that I asked in Nigeria to Chevron recently, and their head of procurement, their head of contracts, basically looked and said, you know what? It isn't really so much that. What the contract first and foremost is it's a document that provides guidance to those people who are delivering the contract. It gives ideas as to their roles, their responsibilities, and their performance expectations. You know, if the legal people are getting involved, then probably something has gone wrong. So first and foremost, a contract is surely there for two parties to actually enable them to do business. And I could show you 1,000 contracts, and every single one is a representation of your company. It's like a novel. And I can pick up a novel and very quickly work out, is this a novel that I want to finish, or is this a novel that I want to put down? And it's the same with a contract. We can pick them up and say, is this a contract I want to work with, or is this a contract that's going to be difficult and painful to me? But ultimately, the first and foremost purpose of any contract is it's about creating economic benefit. Benefit to you, benefit to me. You're receiving a service that is ultimately going to benefit your competitive advantage and allow you to create further value and monetary gain for your organization. And as a supplier, I'm getting paid for doing that and providing that to you. So I'm getting an economic benefit from you, and you're getting an economic benefit from the contract. So let's not forget that, yes, it might be that formal agreement, but actually, first and foremost, it's a tool to be able to create economic benefit to the parties. Now, in these coronavirus times, the economic benefit is something that becomes painful to us because, first and foremost, you know, I need to protect myself. And that means I end up rushing to thinking about, how can I minimize the risk to me? But actually, we need to start to think about, how do I minimize the risk to me and my supply chain? For reasons that I'll come back to in a while. Because is there scope for improving the way organization manages the contracts and suppliers? Don't answer this now, but over the course of the next few days, just think to yourself, with your suppliers, what is it that you do well? What is it that your company is doing badly? How can you be better at those two ideals? And start to think, do you actually have a plan for how you're going to manage the relationship as you're going through the tendering process? And I love this particular diagram. On the y-axis, we have the value. On the x-axis, we have time. And very, very early on in our project, we should have a vision for where is the supplier relationship management going. And as I start to go through the sourcing process, so I start to rise up the red line, I'm already creating value. I'm creating opportunity between myself and ultimately whoever I choose. So I need to have a plan. How am I going to access that value? Because the reason I tender is not necessarily just to fix a price. The reason I tender is to work out which supplier do I want to explore doing this project with. Which one is going to bring value to me? Ultimately, they could all do it for much the similar kind of price. But I choose suppliers not because of necessarily just their price. I'm also choosing them for this orange area, which is value. And I make my decision in part on price, but in part on who is going to give me the value of doing this particular contract. The red line is, and actually there is going to become value that I don't even know about once we get into the contract. So we sign contracts, we implement the contracts, we've established the price, we've established the potential value. And this is the purpose of tendering. Otherwise, I might as well just choose anyone because they can all do it. They can all do it for a price. And if I am only interested in price, then don't spend too long doing the tender. If I am interested in value, then what I need to do is think, how am I actually going to get the value that I'm looking for from here? And what often happens is we forget to then manage the contract. We forget to align our relationships. We forget the reason I chose you. And ultimately, I forget to manage you. And you run along and you do your delivery. And actually, all I really get is just the price that I could have paid anybody. I'm just getting the service, but I'm not getting the value from you specifically. Now, occasionally, I will see that the supplier's performance level drops. So I then kick the supplier and bring the performance level back up. And for a time, and then I get confused and distracted, or maybe coronavirus, and the performance level drops. And then I notice again, and I kick them back up. And we're on this constant cycling wave of benign neglect. The relationships are poorly aligned, poorly managed. Performance is drifting. It's not really being properly managed. So I'm getting some of the value of being with you, but I'm not getting the value of my choice the entire time. If I've got a fully aligned relationship, then actually what I've got is not only the value of why I choose you, but actually what I'm really getting is all of the other reasons that I've chosen you for that I didn't even know about right at the very start. It's that unidentified latent value. There was benefit in working with you that wasn't even apparent to me before I started doing this project. Ilče, looks like you're going to ask me a question.
Yes, I got a very interesting question here. It says, how do you define the value even before starting the relationship or contract? How do you determine the potential value beforehand?
So it's by having a proper evaluation process where I'm looking at essentially the entirety of their proposal and starting to work out which one of these looks like the kind of proposal I could actually work with. Now, a lot of you will call it the technical capability, but then a lot of what happens sometimes in government is we agree that all of these companies are technically capable, so we now just choose the cheapest one. And actually, it's about starting to think in a different way. It's, which is the best commercial value, not which is the cheapest capable supplier. Because do I want the most capable supplier? Not necessarily. Because if I'm going to be their 500th customer in their list of choice, then whilst they may be the most capable, I'm going to get their F team or their E team. I'm not going to get their A team. So what I'm potentially looking for is who is actually going to be committed to me? Who are the suppliers who are going to go above and beyond the call of duty because they're showing a level of commitment to me as a customer through the tendering process. So I'm looking for how do I explore commercial value, not just price. So hopefully that starts to answer the gentleman or lady's question. Yeah. So I need to then recognize that there's some principles. I need to look for win-win outcomes. I need to think about mutual goals. How can I help you achieve what you're looking for, and how can you help me? Let's look to build trust. Let's look to create the right behaviors. And through your tendering process, are you exhibiting the right behaviors? Are you looking to build trust with me? Do we have an environment that is actually dedicated to mutual respect of each other's capabilities and the ethics, maintaining our own respect for the ethics of all of the parties, and that we're free to highlight where we see people operating outside this? And ultimately, it's about communicating honestly, openly, and with integrity. So we are now in this world where we need to actually start to think about the contract, and we need to understand how to read the contract, how to administer the contract. And what that means is I've now chosen somebody to work with, but I've actually got to manage this contract. I've got to make sure I actually get what I've signed up for. And it means I need to stop and I need to think about the terms and the conditions. And it's a question somebody asked me many, many years ago. And it's a question I now ask in the classroom. What are they? What are terms and conditions? And is there a difference between a term and a condition? And it's not something that people often think about because we use those two words, terms, conditions, interchangeably. But actually, terms address specific subjects and your contract clauses contain terms. Conditions are the phrases that then either activate or suspend the term. A condition precedent activates a term. It's an event or an action that must occur before a term or an obligation is enforceable. So, it could be supplier must deliver something before payment terms can happen. And upon delivery, then an invoice can be raised. So the condition precedent is that X or Y has to happen before we can even consider raising an invoice. So it's an event or an action that must occur before a term is enforceable. It could be that, the coronavirus comes along, but until it was declared a pandemic, the force majeure clause wasn't enforceable. But the moment that it was termed a pandemic, depending upon how it was written in your respective contracts, suddenly that force majeure clause becomes in play. So it's an event or an action that must occur before a term or obligation is enforceable. Condition that suspends terms are called conditions subsequent. So it could be that you are, as the customer, potentially going bankrupt. So from my perspective, What that is essentially saying is that I might be able to now look at suspending my work to you as a customer. So the scope of work is something that happens. You suddenly becoming bankrupt as a customer may suspend my right to have to continue delivering to you as a customer. And we have then terms that are active, and a term that is active is something that needs to be actively managed, something that requires an underlying resource, a process, because it has impact on cost, efficiency, and profit. Something that I absolutely must do in order to make sure that this is working as a contract. And passive terms, a term invoked as a consequence of an event, it may never come into effect. It's going to be triggered by specific actions. So active terms, things that need to be managed, scope of work, it could be invoicing, payment, delivery times. They need to be managed in order for us to actually have the efficiency, the cost, and the profit from this particular relationship. Passive terms, things like limits of liability, that is a passive term. It's something that is triggered as the consequence of an event. Ultimately, it is something that sits there and it supports us when problems occur. Coronavirus, force majeure clause. Force majeure is a passive term. If there was no coronavirus, we wouldn't be looking at our force majeure. We wouldn't be looking at the acts of God clause. So it only is invoked as a consequence. And we hope essentially that in our contracts that they are things that we never really have to look at. What we need to focus our energy on is those active terms. And this is an active term. The problem is that it is incredibly difficultly written. And this is what we have in a lot of our contracts. And I'll show this in a classroom and people look at it and they give up because there's no commas, there's no full stops. But what this particular clause says, and it's for a property that I own just outside London, it says that whenever I rent my property out, or whenever I extend a tenant, I'm meant to pay the person who actually owns my building, the freehold, £100 plus VAT. But because this contract is so difficultly written, the people who are managing this contract have never once asked me for the £100. I'm frequently changing tenants, probably twice a year, and I'm meant to pay £100 every time I change a tenant. But the person who actually physically owns the building isn't managing their contract. They are not entitling themselves to the £200 a year that they should be collecting from me, which over the last 15 years that I've had it is £3,000. So it's a company who's essentially missed out on £3,000 of revenue that they are entitled to. But because they don't understand their own contract, because they've written it in language that is not easy for people to use, ultimately they've made £3,000. Except there's 10 flats in my block, which means they probably lost out on £30,000. And actually they own 40 blocks of flats, so they probably lost out on £1.2 million just because they're not actually managing their own contracts. So we need to recognize that every contract we have ultimately contains lots of these terms and conditions. And some of them are active, some of them are passive, and they're invoked and they are brought to life by conditions precedent and they are turned off by conditions subsequent. And a lot of people get focused on I must negotiate price and delivery. But actually, if I want to have a proper negotiation, I need to think about all of these terms and conditions. Because if I change any one of these terms and conditions, ultimately it changes the value of the contract. It changes the risk in the contract. If you want me to deliver sooner, it changes the risk to me, and therefore I'm likely to want to increase my cost. If you want to own the intellectual property, there's a greater risk to me as a supplier, so therefore I'm likely to increase my cost. If you allow me to speak to your clients and treat them as my own potential clients, it reduces my risk, and therefore I'm likely to reduce my cost to you. And these things ultimately represent value. So we need to consider the cost, the risk, and the value in everything that we're doing. So when we're thinking about negotiating, we shouldn't just negotiate. We need to look at across all of those terms, all of those active terms. Everything you want to ask me for is something that you should manage. Because if you can't manage it, then you will end up paying for something that you're not actually managing, that you're not interested. So IACCM, every year, it does a survey of what are your most frequently negotiated terms, and year after year after year, and I haven't got the latest this year, but every single year, number one is limitation of liability, a passive term. Every year, the second most frequently negotiated thing is indemnification. It's a passive term. We don't always have control over price, especially if it's raw materials. So the oil price may change, as it has done from coronavirus and because of what's happening in the oil industry at the moment. So as a result, we are now suffering from significantly lower prices in oil. These price changes, they are a passive term. So this stuff on the left here basically says we start by negotiating what happens when it goes wrong. We start by assuming that our contracts are going to fail. And the old adage is, if you think something, it will happen. If you assume your contract is going to fail, the reality is you probably are going to have a failed contract. So we say to people, why do you focus on the divorce? Because that is essentially what these things are saying, is I'm looking at what's going to happen when this goes wrong. And we say to people, what things would actually be more productive for you? What would be more support more successful relationships? And people tell us this stuff. Scope and goals. That's an active clause. It's something that needs to be actively managed. So let's negotiate. What is the scope that we're looking for? What are the goals that we're trying to achieve? How are we going to manage change? You know, if we've got a robust process for managing change, and all of those strange little things that happen out on site, we suddenly start to have evidence for. So we can now manage change. We can understand communication, reporting, responsibilities of the parties. Those four things are all active. Service levels, active. Warranties, to the extent that I need to know when it's live until, is an active clause. So this is about negotiating for success. How do we make sure that it's a successful relationship? So if this is about negotiating a divorce before it's happened, this is about negotiating the marriage before we sign the contract. So let's spend far more time negotiating how do we have successful outcomes. And that is no more important than it is right now. COVID-19, coronavirus. What we have out there is something, we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't taste it, but it's there, and it is causing immense problems in people's lives. It's causing immense problems to us personally, in our own household finances, in our own household relationships, but it is also causing huge problems to business. So probably we need to start thinking about scope and goals, change management, communication. And I need to start asking questions. I need to sit down with my customers, with my suppliers. And from a supplier perspective, you know, I've spoken to all of my customers at length about how are they being impacted by COVID-19. And many of my customers are telling me about the difficulties that they are in, which is fine. I understand that, because you know, I was meant to be in Dubai this week and next week, in Riyadh last week, but I can't come there. The planes aren't taking off. So for me as a supplier, this is a huge problem. For customers, for LEORON, this is a problem. And for many of you listening on this call, this is a problem. what you're sitting there thinking is, how can I ensure that I actually can still do business when this comes to an end? So what I've heard, what I've seen, and what IACCM has been hearing is lots of organizations actually having adult conversations, asking questions like, can I prepay you? Can I pay you in advance? If I'm actually, quite liquid as a company, maybe I want to pay my supplier in advance to make sure that they are liquid and that they can support themselves through this scenario. Maybe I can increase my commitments. Maybe I can actually purchase greater stock. Ultimately, I want you to ensure that you stay in business. And I've got one supplier in London, one customer in London, a training company that I work with, who didn't have that conversation with me. They turned around and they started talking to me about how difficult life was for them, how much pain that they were suffering, and basically that I was going to have to help them. So therefore, we need to have, I think they were looking for a 50% reduction in my rates. And if I wasn't prepared to do that, then I would need to consider whether or not I wanted to carry on working with them. Well, that's quite an easy decision for me. I don't like the sound of you as a customer. You sound like a customer who's now going to be difficult to do business with. So do you know what? For now, let's just say no. And if you've still got a business at the end of this, then let's work together. That's kind of the mentality that sort of argument is putting forward and across to me. Whereas working with my other customers, we're having far more interesting conversations about how can we work together? How can I ensure that you're still there at the end of this scenario? In exactly the same way as LEORON going to using this webinar approach to doing online training, is them saying, Martin, we want to make sure that we can do business. We want to be here at the end, and we want to hope that you're going to come along on this journey with us. Are you prepared to do the online teaching, on the online training? And my answer is, yeah, let's. It's innovative, it's different, it's intriguing. I'm more than willing to give it a go. I'm help you do these presentations because ultimately I want to maintain the trust of my partners. I don't want to have to build trust with new partners. I'd much rather maintain the trust with this face that's just appeared on my screen, Ilche, because ultimately it takes time to build the trust. And if with my other customer, who's basically saying that they don't really care and that there's no trust there, then the reality is that I'm not that interested in you as a customer. I'll quite happily lose you and I'll find a new partner to replace you with future. I'd much rather maintain the trust and actually work and let's see what we can do to build this going forward. Ilche, you're smiling at me, so tell me the question.
Yeah, well, I received a very intriguing question, actually, which I'm pretty sure that everyone would be interested to know the answer to. I mean, I guess there is no true answer to this. It's regarding what you have been discussed previously about prepaying to certain for certain services. So the gentleman says, what if I prepay to our partners, and then after the crisis, the supplier is out of business?
And it comes down to the extent of the trust between you. I mean, if you're prepaying, during the crisis and they're still delivering to you, that's fine. It's a business risk. It's a business decision that you're going to have to take. And ultimately, what you need to consider is, yeah, maybe the prepaying. I mean, one example, I was talking to a lawyer recently who was telling me about a company in the US is basically it's a landlord, it's got lots of properties, lots of shops, and has essentially said to all of the shops, during this COVID-19 crisis, I'm not going to take my rent from you because I want to give you payment holiday, because I want you to be able to survive this crisis. And what we'll do when we get beyond this is in some way, shape or form, work out a method by which you can back pay me for that payment holiday. Ultimately, I need to understand how liquid am I? What is the risk? If it's many billions of dollars, you're probably not going to do it. But I can't tell you what is the right answer. I can just put ideas there that ultimately are going to make you think. Mortgage companies in the UK, they're sitting here basically now saying we'll give you a 3-month payment holiday. That supplier in the US with the customer, with the people in the shopping precincts, basically saying, do you know what, if they do go out of business, I would have to find a new shop to come and fill this space anyway. So it's in my interest to try to help you to stay in business. I can't guarantee that it's going to work, but that is going to come down to how you and your customers, you and your suppliers work together. So maybe there's, you know, I take the stock, or maybe I over purchase some stock for now to reduce at a later date, or however you choose to structure that. So hopefully, Ultra, that has answered that individual's question. If that individual wants to respond back, I'm more than happy to hear those thoughts. Because at this time, which terms in particular are going to be most important? I've mentioned force majeure, the acts of God, but actually, you know, is there going to be some obligation around continuing performance? You know, actually, in answer to that question, you know, are you going to have to make this up at some point in the future? Actually, maybe I have the right to terminate, or I should be looking to do extensions of time. You know, I need to consider what my future supply chain looks like. So, you know, that is both as a supplier, am I able to supply to my customers, or as a customer in saying, actually, you know, should I be stockpiling stock now? If I've got additional costs, can I recover those additional costs? And the last one there, just before you jump in, Chair, the frustration, the English law principle that actually there is no possibility, it's become objectively impossible to now actually complete this contract. So there's a number of terms that, and these are all passive terms, that are suddenly becoming very valid at this time. Yes, Chair.
Well, related to the same question earlier, well, first of all, thank you so much for the answer. Another gentleman asked something which is quite related to the same. Is it a good practice to check with our suppliers whether they're affected by the situation, by the crisis, and whether they're expecting delay in delivering services or goods?
Absolutely. Nothing for me beats communication. And having continuous quality communication between the parties is fundamental. Now, there may be contractual implications of me advising you that I'm potentially going to, you know, not be able to supply you at some point, and that could lead in certain scenarios to specific issues. So, you know, I would also caveat everything that I'm saying here by having conversations with your legal team, because they are going to be critical to provide you with that advice. But my personal view is, if I can understand the issues that you're having and you can understand the issues that I'm having, then maybe we can do something beautiful together. Now, in the UK, we are currently having about 950, 970 people dying from this disease every single day for the last few days. And one of the things that this country needs is the ventilator machines. And we are in short supply of ventilator machines. We do not have as many as we think we are going to need. And the thing is, the rest of the world all has this same concern. So if you are a ventilator machine supplier, this is a great time for you. Prices have changed. They were £15,000. They're now up to £90,000. You have got a captive market. You can make a fortune selling your ventilators. But it's also created some really interesting conversations. My government spoke to Dyson, the people who make the vacuum cleaners and the hair dryers, because it's the movement of air. And they said to Dyson, do you think you could make a ventilator? Dyson is renowned for having great engineering. And they said, we'll give it a go. So the government's just placed an order for 10,000 from Dyson. And Dyson are working their socks off, looking at how can they create something, and they're essentially looking at having prototype up and running within 2 to 3 weeks. Notwithstanding that, University College Hospital London, that has now entered into a relationship with McLaren F1 team. For F1, hang on, F1, Formula One, what's that got to do with coronavirus? Oh yeah, they're cancelling lots of international Formula One events. But McLaren has said, well, hang on, we've got lots of really intelligent engineers and we think we can actually help. And because we're not currently developing cars, etc., actually, let's see what we can do to help. And they already have another type of ventilator machine called a CPAP, continuous positive air pressure, that is essentially pushing oxygen down into the lungs within a week. They were looking and actually having to and building the first of these. So suddenly you've got innovation like you cannot believe in this world. These organizations are coming together so quickly that they're in a position to be able to really, really create amazing things. You've got F1 teams building ventilators. You've got a Hoover manufacturer, vacuum cleaner manufacturer, building ventilator machines. So I need to start to think about those business relationships that I want to focus on. And any customer ultimately makes their market as easy or as difficult as they want. I make my market difficult by reducing the number of potential suppliers I've got. My market becomes difficult if there's capacity constraints, and there's capacity constraints in our existing market for ventilator machines in the COVID world. My specification, if I have any preferences, any prejudices, time requirements, this is something that we're seeing right now with regards to these ventilator machines, ultimately creates a difficult market. So the reality is, what I need to think about is, how much money am I spending on this? How much and how difficult is my market? Ventilator machines for my government will be up here in this bottleneck section. It's a low spend, high risk. So what I want to do is mitigate or eliminate that risk. Well, they're mitigating it by now working with Dyson, by now working with F1, by working, I think British Aerospace is also doing something in order to build as many of these machines for the UK market as fast as possible. So it is absolutely a way of getting around the bottleneck that we have. And we don't spend huge amounts of money in our health service on these things, so it's a low value, but actually it's very high risk right now. In order to answer that question about prepaying, maybe it's over purchasing, building up a stock at this point in time. Maybe that is sufficient to support your supplier, or at least giving your supplier the confidence of commitment that we're going to do our best to try to ensure that you are still there when we come to the end of this. So when that customer of mine said, you've got to choose, do you want to take a 50% discount or not do any work for us? That's not really a choice, that's a threat. That's a customer who's basically trying to hold a gun to my head and say, you'll do what we want. And the thing is, I don't make a huge amount of money from them each year, so I'm not actually that bothered about them. So they may think that they're really important, but as far as I'm concerned, no, you're not. I'd much rather focus on my key strategic customers, the likes of a LEORON, the likes of an IACCM. And for you as customers, for LEORON as customers, where do they have the high spend? Who are their strategic suppliers? Who are your strategic suppliers? Because that's where the magic happens. That's where we're going to get these amazing opportunities coming at this time. So just if you want to try to change, this comes from a wonderful presentation paper from 2007. And I really enjoyed when I read this particular paper. It's well worth reading. And what it's saying is any organization has the opportunity to change, to build, to move forward. What they need is leadership. And leadership provides a vision. What they need is structures and processes. That's a capability. And what they need is a culture. Well, that's a will, a desire to do so. If Ilcha doesn't mind if I liken this to LEORON and how you are currently working, leadership, we need to now move into this new world of embracing the online technology. Structures and processes, very quickly look evaluated, which is the right tools for the organization to utilize, and the will is instilling within the culture, within the teams, that actually we can do this, that we can actually move forward. The external drivers, they're looking at the first tier partners, the likes of an IACCM who has, the online training, who are there in a position to be able to say, yes, we can actually help. We've done a lot of virtual training over the years, so let's get involved. We've got ideas that we can use to actually help deliver this for you. So we want the shared vision. We need the mutual benefits. We're looking for the open communication between the two organizations. So we've got partners who we operate with, and here we are. Ultimately, we have that relationship between us and LEORON. And between us, it improves and enhances both firms' capacity to collaborate. And as a result, it enhances both organizations' opportunity to learn, to absorb how to make changes. And I've had lots of conversations with Ilcha over the past few days, just some ideas, some suggestions that he's taken on board as to what he can do to actually enhance what's happening within this suite of webinars that we're delivering. Ultimately, it delivers improved competitive performance, not just to the likes of LEORON, but also to IACCM, because there's 294 people on this call at the moment who are all hearing about these two wonderful organizations. So we really need to start to focus and to think about, where do I really want to focus my energy? And I would go back and say, look across, start to be educated that conversation.
Martin, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems there is a problem with your mic. Can you please check?
Can you hear me?
I think, yes, it's better now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's good. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's fine. So it really is a case right now. I'm just going to keep my thumb up just for a second, just to make sure that you can still hear, is to really understand who are the suppliers who are going to be able to help me. Who are the suppliers who I need to really focus on to understand what's this coronavirus doing to them, because I'm going to need those suppliers in the future. If I lose those suppliers, if they go out of business, then when we get to that end point of the coronavirus, what is going to happen to my business? So whilst the gentleman asked about the risk is, what are you going to do if that company goes out of business anyway? If they go out of business, you've now got to spend time finding a new supplier. And whilst you're trying to find a new supplier and spending potentially 3, 6, 12 months looking for someone to replace that supplier, your competitors are way ahead of you. They are so far ahead of you that you're going to be playing catch up for the next 3, 4, 5 years. So really, you want to be having the conversations with your suppliers now to make sure that when the world starts, inshallah, to return to normal, that you are immediately able to capitalize on the good, solid work that you have been doing through the life of that relationship, through this period of coronavirus. Because what you need to do is make sure that you're going to be there. And you need to make sure that your suppliers are going to be there to support you when you get out the other side. So you need to plan, you need to start to contract for that future relationship. And where this diagram comes from is a gentleman called Kjeld Jensen, who's the chairman for the Center for Negotiation Studies at Copenhagen Business School. And he will tell you that in negotiations, because we focus on a divorce, because we focus on this slide that I showed you earlier, because we focus here on the limits of liability, the indemnifications, we never actually discuss everything. And as a result, there's always a lot of value, and I mean value in opportunity sense, left on the table. He would call it the 42%. In most negotiations, the seller will take 39% of the value, the purchaser will take 19% of the value. And because it's done as a slightly more adversarial, let's discuss what happens when it goes wrong, I want discounts, because we're not doing scope and goals and looking at opportunity, we completely missed negotiating this 42%, the what is the art of the possible. And the company who I talked about last Monday, they immediately ended up on this discussion. What they actually completely missed was to think about what is the opportunity, what is the future value. Now, actually, I haven't said goodbye to them. What I did in the negotiation I had with them was listened, but then competently and coherently explained to them why they needed to also consider my perspective. And I put forward to them some alternative options to try to suggest to them, look, I'm here to help you. So I haven't agreed a 50% rate reduction. I haven't agreed any rate reduction. We're going to be looking on a case-by-case scenario. So we're just looking to see what the opportunity is in the future. So at that particular point, we just really get to this, what is the SRM? And what it is it's not a focus on increasing volumes. It is not about just driving down price. In this time of coronavirus, it's about potentially developing new products in the style that the Formula One, McLarens, that Dyson are doing, driving new markets that Formula One and Dyson are now doing, from which we can actually start to drive new revenue. So together, if we can find a way to work together, as I'm doing right now with LEORON, as IACCM is doing with LEORON, we can work together to improve processes. We can be more quick, more efficient. And it was amazing how quickly we managed to transition to doing the course that I did online last week. Literally within the space of 2 weeks, we had that session essentially up and running and planning and making sure that we could do this effectively. Because if we can work together, then ultimately your customers are going to benefit, because you need to make economic value from having me as a supplier. If me as a supplier can help you be a better customer to me, then your customers are going to be better to you. Ultimately, you're going to benefit. But if what you're going to do is just focus on yourself and not think about how your suppliers can actually support you and having that educated conversation, then the reality is that you're not going to benefit. You're going to put yourself into a difficult scenario. So my last slide is just saying, what can SRM do? It can do so much. It can ultimately create a broad view of your customers' needs. It can help the supplier to understand what are you as a customer looking for, because you're sharing knowledge with me and I can use that knowledge, not for nefarious purposes, but for the ability to actually understand how can I help you. So if you're having the conversation with me, as per that question asked, then the reality is I now understand your issues. And because I understand your issues, I can try to use my skills and capability to help you solve your problem, to create targeted products, services, solutions, exactly what this opportunity in this presentation is. And if we can do this together, if we can work together and we can do that, then it's going to continue to build trust between us as parties going forward. And I'm very much looking forward to working with LEORON. IACCM very much looking forward to working with LEORON for the next year, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, as long as it takes, because it is very much about continuing the trust. So, we evaluate the opportunity. but ultimately it's about how can we get it from both sides. So if you've got an SRM team inside your organization, then ultimately what you're doing is looking to implement innovative approach. You're looking, and you will be in a great position to be able to ultimately, in these times, not only survive coronavirus, but to be able to thrive, to have the competitive advantage ahead of the rest of your competition once we get out the other side. So on that note, Ulcha, I'm going to finish. I'm just going to put this one last slide up, which is just so that you guys can sort of talk about when you've got programs coming up. For those of you who are interested in this, I can only talk about my two specifically. So for those of you who are interested in learning about supplier relationship management in more detail, come join me online on the 17th to the 19th of May. If conversely, or also you're interested in the Contracts Commercial Management Practitioner course from IACCM, come join me on the 21st to the 25th of June. But to that end, I shall terminate myself. Well, I won't terminate myself, but I will finish conversing and hand back to Ulcha in case there's any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Martin, for the brilliant presentation, and I really hope that everyone else liked it. You covered some really interesting hot topics during this about 70 minutes so far. We got so many good questions. Unfortunately, due to the time limit, we cannot answer them all. I was trying to, kind of pick up the good ones which were kind of related to your current topic of discussion. There are so many other good questions that are left unanswered, unfortunately, and I'm really sorry for everyone who didn't get their answers on time. Maybe me and Martin will try to kind of answer them later on or in any other opportunity whenever we meet with this gentleman. And that's all from my side. I will leave it for Mario if he has anything to add, and we'll wrap it up.
Great. Well, yes, thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Ulcha, for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, I really believe that this was beneficial for you. You took the most out of it. I hope we'll be seeing you again soon on one of our programs, actually. And in that direction, I just wanted to do one announcement. I think you will be interested into hearing this. I'm very happy to inform you all that LEORON will be providing each and every one of you that's with us here today a $200 voucher that you can use as a discount if you decide to join any of our training programs. Of course, this is valid for the other industries that we cover as well, not only contracts and procurement. However, since the majority of you guys are from this field, on your screens you can see the upcoming schedule, as Martin said, for the upcoming courses related to procurement and contracts. Of course, we have the CCMP and the SRMP, for which Martin is directly and personally in charge of. Additionally, we also have the CIPP and the SPMS procurement courses. So these are coupons you can practically all use in the upcoming 7 days if you decide to register on each of these courses and maybe get certified as well. Why not? So that will be all from my side as well. Again, I hope you all stay safe, you stay healthy, stay inside, stay at home. And I hope we'll be seeing you all very soon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.